Before we get into the AMD versus NVIDIA content, I want to talk a little bit about the graphics scaling in this game. So if you look at the Ultra preset versus the low preset, so the highest settings versus the lowest settings available in this game, I only found 34% scalability in this section of the game that I'm testing, which is one of the most demanding sections of the game. I went with this section where you're in the Scorpion tank. There's lots of enemy vehicles, lots of enemies. There's lots of friendly NPCs. So this is one of the most demanding areas of the game. And at ultra native TAA on the 5070 Ti, 1440p, I'm at 61 FPS, and going down to low settings only got me to 82, which is only 34% improvement in performance. If you go down to the high settings, which are now on the right, versus ultra on the left, so one notch down for max, you actually gain 23% performance. So I really find that, like most Unreal Engine 5 games, honestly, the high graphics preset is the sweet spot between visuals and performance if you're just going to pick an overall preset and roll with it. That got me 75 FPS at native 1440p TAA on the 5070 Ti versus the 61 FPS on the Ultra preset. Now, really, high is where you get a big chunk of the performance gain from turning things down, and you don't get much more by going to medium. Here you're looking at the high preset on the left and the medium preset on the right, both at native TAA again. And here I'm getting 75 FPS on the high preset and only 77 FPS on the medium preset. That's only a 2 FPS or 3% performance improvement here, which isn't much. Now, granted, there's some run-to-run variance in this test scene. This is not a built-in benchmark, and there's a lot going on, but the run-to-run variance is a couple percent at most. So really, there's just not a lot of scalability, at least in this scene, when dropping from high to medium. So overall, it looks like high is the sweet spot, but as is also the case with most Unreal Engine 5 games, I found that there's more performance to be had from resolution scaling than there is from adjusting the normal graphic settings. Here we're looking at the Ultra preset again, native TAA on the left and DLSS balanced on the right, and we're going from 61 FPS all the way to 101 FPS average, which is a 66% performance improvement just by resolution scaling, significantly better than by going all the way down to the minimum graphics preset. So that certainly seems to be the way to go for performance improvements here, although obviously you could combine the two and go with like high with resolution scaling. But anyway, this video is going to be looking at the 9070 XT versus the 5070 Ti, and before we get further into that, I do want to mention that I got my key for the game at Games Planet. I am a Games Planet affiliate. There will be a link in the description, and I can get you 10% off through that link, so if you are considering getting this game, hey, I could save you money. I do get a cut of that, but at no additional cost to you. It's a win-win. I reject most key-selling sites who have offered affiliate deals or sponsorship deals because many of them are gray markets, whereas Games Planet, I thoroughly researched, they source their keys directly from the game publishers, so people who make the game are actually getting paid, everything's above the board. This particular game has the key available on the Windows Store rather than Steam, so do be aware of that. It's also on the UK site for Games Planet rather than the US site, but my activation worked completely fine in the US on my PC, I had no issues with that. So anyway, there will be links in the video description if you want to take a look at the game and get a discount on it. Now let's look at the 9070 XT versus the 5070 Ti, and we'll look at all of those things I just tested, ultra, high, medium, and low, both at native resolution and upscaled for all of those settings. Now for the 9070 XT, I've got the ASRock Monster Hunter Wilds edition, which I received as a review sample. And for the 5070 Ti, I have the Asus Prime model, which I also received as a review sample. And both of them are at their out-of-the-box settings. Overall test platform system specs are in the video description. Everything's high-end 9800X 3D, so we should be looking at GPU-limited performance here rather than the rest of the system becoming a bottleneck. Let's go ahead and hit play. So here I'm getting 58 FPS average at native TAA max settings, ultra preset. The only thing I changed, by the way, is I turned off motion blur. There's no option to turn off chromatic aberration or film grain, which would be really nice, although you can modify the INI files. I was leaving that alone here. Anyway, 58 FPS on the 9070 XT versus 61 FPS on the 5070 Ti, so it's pretty close, but it is a 3 FPS or 5% lead for the 5070 Ti at max settings native TAA 1440p in this game. I'm using native TAA since they can both use it, whereas now we'll look at upscaling where there's going to be FSR versus DLSS, so there can be some image quality differences. I know the gameplay footage is not exactly identical, so it's hard to, particularly pick apart any little minor graphical differences, but you get a general feel. Both of them do look pretty good here. But yeah, it's not completely apples to apples, but it is what you would use when using these GPUs. At these settings, with FSR and DLSS both set to balanced, which in this game, by the way, the options menu calls it high rather than balanced, but it's 100 FPS versus 101, so basically a tie. The 5070 Ti is 1 FPS and 1% ahead. Switching back to native TAA, so it's once again an apples to apples comparison, but going down to the high preset rather than the ultra, which, like I said, if you're just picking a graphics preset to use without adjusting individual settings separately, is probably the most optimal choice between visuals and performance. We're now hitting 74 FPS on the 9070 XT versus 75 FPS on the 5070 Ti. So basically a tie. Once again, it's a 1% and 1 FPS advantage for the 5070 Ti. Both of them getting pretty solid performance here. Although I did notice that the 5070 Ti has a little bit larger lead in the 1% lows, which is that third FPS number if you're looking at the stats at the top. Now, if we stay at the high preset, but now go to FSR and DLSS at the balanced setting, which again in this game they call the high setting for whatever reason, we see that the 9070 XT seems to scale better than the 5070 Ti when using its respective upscaling option. It's hitting 125 FPS versus 116 FPS on the 5070 Ti. So it's still rather close, but it's moved to an 8% lead for the 9070 XT. Both are absolutely playable and all that, but it did scale better, and now it also has the lead in the 1% lows. If we go back to native resolution with TAAs for, once again, an apples-to-apples comparison, this time at the medium preset, both GPUs are averaging exactly 77 FPS. So complete tie here at the medium preset. And this is one reason why I test a bunch of settings too, is because sometimes one GPU has an advantage at one set of graphic settings and another GPU has an advantage at a different set of graphic settings. So I'm going to test all of the presets here as well as native versus upscaling, but at native medium settings, we're seeing a tie with 77 FPS for both. And then switching over to FSR and DLSS balanced, we once again see that the 9070 XT scales a little faster once using upscaling, despite having been exactly tied at their native resolutions. It's 129 FPS on the 9070 XT versus 118 FPS on the 5070 Ti. So it's now almost reached a double-digit lead in percentages. It's a 11 FPS lead, but a 9% performance lead for that 9070 XT. And once again, I do want to stress that this is a very demanding scene with all of the vehicles, multiple enemy and friendly NPCs, all of that. So pretty demanding area of the game. If we go to the low preset now, which is the lowest graphics preset that is available, and also switch back to native TAA once again for an apples-to-apples comparison, we once again have an exact tie with 82 FPS on both. So good frame rates for native TAA, although again not getting huge amounts of scaling going from ultra all the way down here to low. That's why I said that I thought high was going to be the optimal choice if you're just picking a graphics preset overall. But as I also said, the resolution scaling is really where you get most of the performance gains here. So by going to the low preset with FSR and DLSS at balanced, so now we're looking for, you're trying to, turn the graphic settings down and use resolution scaling to get all the performance that you can. We're now seeing that the 9070 XT is at 136 FPS versus the 5070 Ti at 127 FPS. So the 9070 XT here has a 7% advantage over the 5070 Ti and 9 frames per second. So again, it's not exactly apples to apples because there are differences in the image quality of the FSR versus DLSS, but overall, that's what we get. So that is all of the graphics presets tested at both native resolution and with upscaling enabled. Overall thoughts are that the 5070 Ti had the slight advantage when at the maximum settings, but once things are turned down a bit, it looks like at native resolution, it's pretty much a tie, but the AMD GPU is scaling a little bit faster when resolution scaling. However, again, that then brings in to the, slight differences in image quality, things like that, which is beyond the scope of this video to make a detailed claim. In general, usually DLSS does have a bit of an edge image quality-wise, but with FSR 4, the gap has closed significantly to where I think both are looking pretty solid here. And at high settings with upscaling, which is how I'd probably play it on both GPUs personally for good frame rates and still pretty decent visuals, it's 8% lead for the 9070 XT, and both are near 120 FPS, so pretty good experience for a single-player shooter. I think, especially one that, personally I would actually play this game on a controller just because it's Halo, and to me, Halo feels right on a controller, whereas basically any other first-person shooter on a PC I would play with a mouse. I know some of you are going to be like, blasphemy that I'm suggesting using a controller, but Halo just feels right on a controller if you grew up spending thousands of hours playing Halo on a controller anyway. All right, guys, that is that. Other than I guess we could talk about, on the US market right now, 9070 XTs cost $700 and go up from there, whereas 5070 Ti's in the current market are nearly $1,000. That's not a 5070 Ti. So these are $950 and up. So there's certainly a big price difference in the current US market for about the same performance in this game, but this is just one game. I have videos testing them out in other recent games, as well as, big head-to-heads with tons of games in them. And like I said, I usually test out multiple settings and native resolution and resolution scaling to get a better, fuller picture of how people might actually use these GPUs. And again, if you are interested in the game, you could check out the Games Planet link. Now, my thoughts on the game overall, as just a reminder, if you didn't watch my first video testing this out on a variety of hardware, that was more of a gameplay test rather than the side-by-side benchmarks, is I'm disappointed that there's no split-screen multiplayer for the PC version. There is on consoles. For me, if this game is going to, again, also not have PvP multiplayer, then the kind of couch co-op situation is how I played the original Halo, so I actually did want to do a bit of that, try it out with my kids, maybe have a friend over, play it, that kind of thing. And yes, you can plug a PC into a TV and use controllers. So I think it's ridiculous that they don't include split screen multiplayer in a Halo campaign on the PC version for some reason. So that's my biggest, personal complaint about the game. So there's that. At least I can get you a bit of a discount if you are interested. And anyway, I hope you guys found the video useful and or interesting, and I hope you have an excellent day.